Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to another awesome arts integration audit. So, I'm Susan Riley. I'm an arts integration specialist and the founder at the Institute for Arts Integration and STEAM over at artsintegration.com. And I'm doing a series that I'm hopeful is helpful to many of you who are either teaching art with arts integration or as an administrator who is overseeing arts integration. I'm taking a look at a variety of different lessons and doing just a quick audit on them on how they showcase arts integration, whether they're really arts integration or if they're more arts enhancement. And I'm showcasing a lot of different examples so that together we can learn what makes a really high quality arts integrated lesson experience, which is what we want because research tells us that that is what gets the results of higher academic achievement, greater student engagement, and lessening classroom disruptions. So, last time in our series, I took a look at a free teacher pay teacher lesson, and we did an audit on that. If you've missed it, I'll link it in the comments. What's important about that one is that there was no lesson plan template necessarily. It was something that you could quickly download. It had a PowerPoint activity with it, and it was a nice lesson, but as we determined, it's arts enhancement, that the visual art component that was attached to it was really being used to make the learning sticky, to make as a fun component, but we weren't learning anything specifically about the art itself. This week's lesson is a little bit different. This week's lesson, I'm showcasing one that was turned in from one of our online courses. In our courses, we ask our students to submit lessons so that we can help them refine them and to make them even better. And so I'm including one from one of our online courses. We do this with our courses as well as our certification program. And our student here, again, is anonymous, but this teacher is a computer teacher, and she is connecting visual art with computer at the middle school level. So before we dig into that, though, I want to showcase something. Some of you DM'd me the last time and asked if there was a metric that we use in order to kind of look over these lessons. And there's actually two that we use pretty frequently. And I want to share them with you today. So let me just hop over to that metric. One of them is our actual rubric scoring guide that we use with our certification candidates, because we really want them to narrow down and deepen their understanding of arts integrated lessons, since they'll be creating them and teaching them to other educators. But for a general lesson like what we're using today, I will often use this integrated look for sheet. So this look for sheet can serve two purposes. One, you can use it during your lesson review, or if you are observing someone who is doing an arts integrated lesson, this look for sheet is also really helpful for that. So for example, let's really zoom in here so you can see. We have some metrics on the side and then two checkboxes. So we want to make sure, ideally, that we're checking both the art form and the content for each of the metrics. Okay, so for example, are there standards from both disciplines being addressed? Is there a standard from the art form? Is there a standard from the content, right? Is the district curriculum being taught in each of these areas? Sometimes, even though the standards are both there, maybe we're only teaching the content and not really teaching the art form. So again, this would be a good, helpful check. Does the lesson support a dynamic learning environment? So if I'm reading this, do I see an opportunity for students to be engaged on a variety of different levels? Again, is there a high level of student engagement? If I'm using it from the lesson standpoint, are there opportunities for students to engage cognitively at a higher level than maybe they would otherwise? If I'm reviewing a lesson, perhaps as a peer review, am I seeing student engagement, right? Am I seeing students at a high level working together? Excuse me. Are there a variety of strategies in use to check for student understanding in both the arts area and the content? Are assessments being used across both disciplines to guide instruction? And we're going to see this in today's audit. Does the assessment match the standard that you've selected, are you actually assessing that standard in both the art form and the content area? Are natural connections evident between these two disciplines? And is there a seamless flow going? Is there a back and forth? So am I teaching a little bit from the arts component, a little bit from the content component, combining both of them throughout the lesson in some way? And I could check that off here as well. This look for sheet is really quick and it's very simple, but it's super effective when we're thinking about the quality of an arts integrated lesson experience. Okay, so let's dive into today's lesson. As I said, this is an 8th grade lesson, so a middle school lesson. We're connecting computer and visual arts. And this is about next year's calendar. So the general gist of this lesson, it's supposed to take 6 to 7 50-minute periods. So it's quite a long lesson. But the whole gist of this is that students are going to be creating their own calendars. Okay. Now, one thing you'll notice that's very different from the example that I used last time from our audit last time is that we're using a template, right? That clearly we're using some sort of template. Again, this is what we provide to our specialists and to our course participants. We want to make sure that you have a way to make the process as streamlined as possible. So the benefit to using this kind of a template is that each of the components that make a successful arts integrated lesson are going to be here for you to fill out. That's really important because then you don't have to think about, am I forgetting something that is supposed to be a great element? The trick though is to ensure that when we're filling in these boxes, we're doing so thoughtfully and intentionally with the idea of combining both of these, the content and the arts area together in a meaningful way. Right? Okay, so with that big understanding in mind of what we're trying to accomplish, we've got 2 standards selected here, a visual arts standard, and it looks to be a computer standard for middle school. So the visual arts standard is to select, organize, and design images and words to make visually clear and compelling presentations. So in this standard, what we're asking our students to do is to take a look at a variety of opportunities in visual art. So it could be illustrations, it could be photographs, it could be any kind of other art medium, and to select the pieces that you want to include in a presentation, and for those things to make sense to work together to create a presentation that is compelling and that is organized and that is clear. Okay, that's what we're asking them to do. And then in the technology component, it says to select appropriate tools and technology resources to support learning and personal productivity, publish individual products, and to design, develop, and publish data, accomplish a variety of tasks, and solve problems. So essentially, how do we select computing tools to help us in our everyday tasks and data that we need to solve? And so, yes, this will address using a calendar, but I even think the calendar aspect of this does not directly address this standard as well as it could be. Now, the big idea here is to create next year's calendar using tables in Word. This right here gives me a big clue. If this is the big idea that mentions nothing about visual art, I have a feeling that the rest of this lesson is going to be very similar. Again, in a big idea or in any section here, because it's a connected lesson, it's an integrated lesson, I want to see both the content and the arts reflected in each of the areas that are being requested. So the big idea here should also include a visual arts big idea. So whether or not that's create next year's calendar using tables in Word and a selection of media that by the student, that could be a big idea. But again, there's nothing here to tell me about the visual art component. The essential question, how to use tables in Word to help me design something I can use. Besides the fact that this isn't worded great, again, it only tells me I'm only really focused on tables in Word. That's very clear to me that that is what you're trying to get students to do. What does the visual art have to do with that? How is that going to deepen their understanding of this? How could you rewrite that essential question to include the visual art as well as the technology component. And the reason that this is difficult for this particular student is because the student is only really looking at this from the computer lens that she teaches, instead of stepping back and going, okay, outside of what I would normally teach, how could I bring that visual arts component in a way that's meaningful and intentional? And then what essential question could I ask that would address both the visual art piece and the computer piece, right? It has to be able to apply to both. We then have 21st century skills here, which is great. Key vocabulary. Again, I want to see key vocabulary from both content areas. Background and foreground could go to the visual arts component, but it's superfluous in a way. I want to see something that is perhaps looking at the arts in a different way. Maybe you're focused on graphic design and looking at keywords in graphic design, fonts, color choices, color theory, color psychology, why designers use those kinds of things, right? So what are some key vocabulary that graphic designers use, and how could we incorporate that in here as well? So that's something to think about. Now, this is an area where some teachers do not have access to this particular area, but I find it really super helpful is the vertical alignment. Most lesson plans do not have this, but here's why it's important. Vertical alignment is essentially saying, here's what happens before this lesson takes place. Here's a summary of what I'm trying to accomplish in this particular lesson during this time. And then after this lesson, here's what I plan to have students work on next. What this does is provide context. Because if an administrator walks into your computer class and you are having students practice picking their favorite color, that doesn't necessarily translate into computer class, right? But if there's this understanding that before the lesson, students are taught about Word and tables, and that graphic designers can manipulate tables in lots of different ways. And then this lesson, they're practicing that manipulation and using color choice to enhance their table. And then after the lesson, they're going to look at how other calendars have been designed across the world. That makes more sense as an administrator if I'm walking into this situation with no clue, right? It provides really important context. So I love vertical alignment when it's there. Now, taking a look at this, it's again really clear where this lesson is going. First of all, during the lesson section, this should be a summary. It should not be the focal lesson itself. So I want to see that captured a little bit more clearly and succinctly. And then before the lesson, this is saying the students will have created tables in Word and have learned how to insert a picture. So they're really just learning the technology piece ahead of this lesson. And then after the lesson, once their calendar is correct, it's going to be printed out on a color printer. Okay, great. But again, how does that address the visual art component? Once we've got that listed, then we've got material lists. That's just a way to help teachers have a good preparation for the lesson. And then we get into instructional delivery. And so I like having this split out for educators. It's included in the template. It makes it super easy because then we start with the student learning outcomes, a pre-engagement piece, which is like the hook, or sometimes it's guided instruction, but most times it's the hook or the bell ringer or something to get started. And then we have the focal lesson followed by the assessment, right? So in this, just taking a look at this to know how to create tables in Word, how to modify them, how to insert a picture into the table as either a background or in a cell, and how to change font color when needed. The last two I know are being put in here as a reference to visual art, but that's not really what the visual art standard is asking them to do. Remember, the visual art standard is asking students to select visual art media to create a compelling presentation. This is not, neither of these is talking about selecting items. It's just talking about how to insert it, right? It's not about the selection itself or why it was selected or what the purpose is behind it. The pre-engagement students are given a handout with real dates of the next year's calendar, the holidays and school breaks, and they're encouraged to also include their own holidays and dates that are important. And then in the lesson itself, it's just that students are going to create a 12-page calendar for next year, that they have to have at least one picture on each page, and that the holidays and school breaks must also be on there. And then once it's correct, it will be printed out. So again, this is not, first of all, I would love to see step by step, like what exactly are you teaching during each lesson? What are you focused on? Also, I would love to see this much more connected to the visual art component. Taking a look at graphic design, what do graphic designers have to keep in mind when they're developing calendars? There are some specific things that designers have to actually consider in terms of how you're going to extend, if it's a 31-day month, but you only have blocks for 28. Are you going to do a slash? Are you going to do 2 boxes? How does that look in order to be able to create more days if needed? What font choice, why, and then what colors they're going to choose, how the image of that month represents that month, why it was chosen, or if an illustration should be used instead. Do you see how much more robust this lesson could be if we really thought about the artistic component and then had students specifically select their choices for each of those things? That makes this a more meaningful lesson. Right now, this is very much an arts enhancement lesson that is dressed up in a arts integration lesson template. And I hope that you can see that, because the arts are only being used in service here to make it look pretty, right? There's not a next step here that makes this more meaningful. In the end, we also have an assess and extend section. So each of these assessments should measure the standard that was selected at the top. So let's start with the content assessment. So in this is how we're going to know that students are successful. Each month is on a separate page. It contains a correct number of days. It starts on the correct day. The days of the week are consistent. The national holidays and school breaks are on the calendar, and there's at least one picture for each month. Okay, so that is for the project. That's how we know they're successful in the project. Let's take a look at the standard itself. Select appropriate tools and technology resources to support learning and personal productivity. Publish individual products, and design, develop, and publish data. Okay, so that checklist does not necessarily relate to anything in that standard except for publishing data. So even here, we have to be really careful that we're measuring the standard that is being asked, not a one piece of it. Okay, then the arts assessment. Each picture is easy to see. Each picture does not cover any dates, and the font has been changed so dates and any description is easily seen. Okay, none of that has anything to do with select, organize, and design images and words to make visually clear and compelling presentations. Maybe, if I am really generous, I can say maybe designing words to make it visually clear with the font component. But really, this assessment is just a checklist of how to make it pretty. And it's, again, not addressing that standard. I do like the 2 extensions here. I find extensions are helpful, especially if you have students who finish before others, early finishers, students of exceptional abilities that need a differentiation of some sort. So I appreciate that this is in here. The content extension is that students have included dates that are important to him or her and holidays that the family celebrates. I'd actually like to see that woven into the lesson itself. I don't think that that's something extra. I think that that should be a part of it. And the arts extension really should have been woven in as well, that students have made their own picture using Draw or similar application. Finally, we have reflection opportunities, the student reflection prompts, and the teacher reflection prompt. The student prompt, why did you choose these pictures? That's helpful. I want to know that information. I like that prompt. But again, it needs to be woven into that lesson. And then the teacher reflection prompt, this could be for any lesson. So I feel like this is a throwaway. Like, what do I need to do better to support students who are struggling? Okay, but what specifically in this lesson do you want to reflect about what went well, what didn't go well, and how you can improve? So I'd like to see a more specific question for that. So that is our our audit for this time around. I hope you found that to be helpful as I went through it. And if you have questions, if you have a lesson or something that you've seen or found and you want to see, is this arts enhancement or is it arts integration? Drop it in the comments. I'm happy to put it on the list for an upcoming audit. Thanks so much. I hope this was helpful. Bye for now.